What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JAR. JAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe.
And Amy.
Review. It's our weekly show where we go over the magic stories as they're posted on Wizards' website, or as we've been doing more recently, the Magic Story podcasts as well. This week, we have the last of the Commander 2017 podcasts for the tribes, this tribe being the Cat Tribe.
Yeah.
My quick review in the beginning, and I think it's going to be Amy's as well. If you've been following along with either the podcasts and or our jars for the past couple of weeks, you'll know that I was not looking forward to this one at all. From some of the people in our comment section, they were not looking forward to this one either. This one, though, for our quick review, was the best one yet. I actually would recommend that you listen to this one. If you listen to none of the other ones, I would recommend you listen to this one. If you want in-depth stories about all of the commanders that they gave you in this in the cat deck, you're not going to get a ton of that, but you will get some. And there was just, I thought, a lot of entertaining, good discussion for the topic that they were given this week. So my quick review is, it's worth your time. It's about 19 minutes long. And I would recommend it, especially more so than all the other ones, but even that would be a pretty low bar. I enjoyed it.
My review would be, it's still skippable.
Fair. It's definitely not a necessity. I just was entertained.
But you don't need to skip it. The other ones you do if you want to preserve however much time each of them took and use it for literally anything else. But this one you could certainly listen to, and it would be fun, and it would be light, and it would be informative. Which is all we really wanted. And we got it with this one.
So that's our quick review at the beginning. If you haven't listened to it yet, I definitely recommend that you go do that. We recommend that you could do that. If you want to skip it instead, that's fine as well. If you don't have the time, it's not a necessity, but it was enjoyable if you do have the time and want to hear Blake and Allison talk about it. So on to the full review itself. This was good, guys. It was actually really, I appreciated it. I wouldn't say it was really good, but it was good. I liked it. And it's funny because they did a lot of the same things that they did in past ones, at least in terms of kind of similar questions that Blake asked of Allison. It was kind of the similar, what cat would you like to write a story about? And who is your favorite cat in Magic? And let's talk broadly about cats in Magic, and let's talk about how cats in Magic differ from cats in the past discussions. It was, wizards in pop culture or whatever. But in this case, it could be cats in the real world. And so a lot of the topics that they touched on were similar, if not exactly the same, as they had done in these past couple of podcasts on this same topic. But for whatever reason, it worked. I don't know if you have an idea on why.
Because the space between was less awkward.
Okay.
Because the moments of Allison's personality meshing with Blake's personality, they actually meshed instead of just being odd.
Okay.
Like, uncomfortably odd.
See, and if you want my opinion, because I thought about this a lot, because I genuinely wanted to know after it was over why I felt like it was different, if I could still point to all of these parallels. And I don't disagree with you, but that is not the point that I honed in on in terms of the differences or why it was so different. The thing that I focused on, I think, the most was the fact that there was a lot more story discussion that I could be interested in, and the non-story discussion was still interesting. It was still entertaining,
Yeah, it was still something you could listen to, even if it wasn't something you were focused on.
And it as a whole of a podcast did not overstay its welcome.
Right.
I don't remember whether it was last week's or the week before, but was a half hour long.
It was every week where it really, there was a logical stopping point, and then they still went beyond it with things that were just so unnecessary. That was every single week except this one.
Yeah. So, but this one, you know, even like silly things, I mean, I wrote down notes about it. You know, they started with, "Are you a cat or a dog person?" That is a traditional comment when you're talking about one group or the other. "Oh, do you like cats or do you like dogs?" If you care, dog person.
I like both of them.
Okay. I actually despise cats. That's just me personally.
I don't really like cats, but I realized I don't really like dogs that much either.
No, I love dogs, but I dislike cats.
I'm not much of a pet person, really, that much either.
Okay. But regardless, if that matters, if you care, because it was, as they mentioned and as I agree with, that's a very kind of tropey thing to do, is if you're talking about one group, you have to kind of ask the people who are having that discussion if they are that kind of a person or not. And yet, within Magic, there are not very many dogs in general. I mean, there are jackals and things like that, and there are hounds or whatever, but they are not as iconic. Wolves as well. They are not as iconic as cats in Magic by any means.
Obviously not, yeah.
You know, especially, I mean, me personally, we've talked about this on the show a lot, and Amy usually says it with disdain because of how often I talk about it, but I really enjoy a Johnny. He's definitely one of my favorite planeswalkers, if not my favorite. He's probably my favorite member of the Gatewatch, although a later addition and not as heavily focused on. And one of my, we'll talk about this a little bit later, because they touch on a Johnny, and sorry, I shouldn't say touch on. They focus pretty heavily on a Johnny, which makes perfect sense, because they talked about vampires in general. In the vampire one, they talked about, you know, wizards in general, even if they weren't prominent players in Commander 2017's version of cats or vampires, wizards, dragons, whatever. They still talked about it in terms of who's your favorite dragon, who's your favorite whatever. And so it makes sense for them to talk about a Johnny, even though he's not in Commander 2017. Allison talked about Brimaz, who I was hoping they would bring up at least once, and he's not in Commander 2017, but he's a prominent, or they are prominent cat figures in Magic. And so I was glad that they at least touched on them, and like I said, with a Johnny it was much more than touched on, because he is such a heavily discussed character.
Right, and he's actually in the lore.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
Frequently
in the lore.
Right, and in the somewhat recent lore.
Correct.
Where,
as opposed
you know,
to Miri, who is from so long ago, and yet has a pretty rich story to her, which unintentionally transitions us into the fact that Miri was, I think, the one character that, of the commanders from the cat deck, that they talked about the most.
Yeah.
I think
she really kind of went in depth discussing her backstory and motivations and what have you.
Yes. Miri versus Miri the Cursed, and the fact that it was like an alternate reality where in one, Miri lets Krovax kill her to save Gerard, I believe, but otherwise in the other one, Miri kills her foe and becomes cursed herself, but then Krovax ends up killing her anyway. Which, again, all of these things are leading up to the fact that, at least in my opinion, are helping to lead up to the fact that we're going back to Dominaria.
Yeah.
And these are all characters from there. My concern is there's a new block structure in that there are no more blocks. So you have one set to tell the story of Dominaria, which is a place that everyone was hoping we'd go back to, and now you've limited yourself to one set, whereas originally it was, I don't know, 75.
Well,
I'm
they
estimating.
probably did that on purpose because maybe they only have one set's worth of content that they really want to pay to Dominaria at this time.
At this time.
Like, it might be the kind of thing where they're going, we want to revisit again.
They have to.
But
they would have to if they were going to touch on everything that Vorthos players are going to be salivating for once Dominaria comes around, because there's almost no way, and I won't say there's no way because never say never, nothing's impossible, but there's almost no way that you meaning the story team would be able to touch on every single thing in one set. It's just not an option, in my opinion.
And, I mean,
of
in
course.
the story right now, we're seeing that the whole Weatherlight thing is going to kind of,
hopefully,
kind of turn around on itself, and so we're going to kind of start to see a connection between these stories and these planes in a way that we didn't before.
Hopefully, yes, agreed.
And so that's going to create a lot more opportunities for them to revisit places that we've seen before.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like, as well as at the same time making the players still excited about the fact that you're going back to these places.
Right.
Instead of saying, oh yeah, that plane again.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's more not only more frequent opportunities to revisit, but I think closer together would make more sense in this structure that they have now.
Right.
If that makes sense.
To kind of, I like that, having that discussion, but to kind of go back to the podcast itself, because we have time for that, unfortunately, or fortunately, but I just don't want to wait. I want to hear about it now.
Fortunate.
Yeah, I mean, we still have Ixalan, which we'll talk about that at the end as well, but that's coming up next, and that'll be interesting. But in terms of this podcast, at one point Blake jumped in and he said, I'm going to try not to do this constantly, but I have stories about my own cats. I thought that was cute. When he first said it, I was like, great. That's what's going to happen now. Is he's just going to,
It's going to be that awkward BS again.
Yeah.
But it actually wasn't.
It was only one story. It was actually kind of cute. They called back to it, at one point in a later discussion with the stuffed carrot that he was talking about. It was a funny story. And originally I thought to myself, hey, if all your stories are going to be like that, keep them coming. But because it was 19 minutes long, I don't think I would have wanted more than just the one, but I don't think that the one was out of place at all. I thought it was a nice distraction, kind of taking a step away and then taking a step back in. I thought it was fine. I thought it was a fine diversion.
You liked it and you said keep them coming, but time-wise it didn't make sense.
Right.
I felt differently in that I didn't think keep them coming, but I still felt that this podcast was shorter and also felt shorter.
Yes.
Than the other ones because it was just that much better.
Yes.
So I feel like what made it good was the fact that he stuck to one and just revisited it. Instead of sprinkling all these sort of random happenings throughout. I think that's what kept it good. Gave it its momentum that it had. I think if he had added others in, it would have bogged it down the way the other ones were.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed.
But to argue with myself on that point, I feel like because this one was shorter and had more of a quick pace and a flow to it that was a lot nicer than the others. If he had added in another story or two, I don't think I would have hated it. But I do think it may have worsened that flow, which is what gave it a lot of what made it good,
Yeah,
I think.
if it makes sense, I think the best thing that they did with this podcast was they had good time management.
Yeah.
That's the best way I can put it. I don't know that that's the proper terminology, but that's the best way
No,
I can think of it.
I think it is, because they, like I said, it had a flow to it, but it also, they didn't get way off track like
Yep.
they kept on doing before,
Yep.
and they didn't dwell way too long on stuff that wasn't on track.
Right.
When they did veer off track.
Mhm.
And they didn't, I don't know.
I agree with you. I definitely agree that, like I said, that's the term that I came up with was time management, and that they did it well. I think, besides Miri, I think that the only other commander that they spoke about that I was interested in terms of how in depth they went into their story, was Nazan's. I liked that Allison, it was mostly Allison in this particular case, was talking about Nazan's hammer, and was talking about the fact that Nazan with his hammer could have, she used the pop culture example, he could have gone all Thor because it's such a powerful hammer,
Right.
and yet he just wanted to use it to perfect his smithing work.
Yeah.
That's really cool. That's
Yeah.
a really nice, and it's a quick thing, right? She didn't dwell on it. She didn't go all into it and in depth and, throw in like things that were minute that
Right.
very few people would have understood. It was very much just touch on it, move away.
Yeah, but the other thing that was cool was the fact that her moving away wasn't here and then here topic-wise. It was a nice segue, because the information that was in between those two things was, oh, well, I like that kind of thing personally because, I really enjoy a story where the characters do very typical things that I can relate to in a magnificent way. That's a great segue going from topic A to topic B, and keeping it interesting, and also giving that blending that happened with this one, and really not with the other ones.
Right, and speaking
Ow.
of which, allow me to segue as well, because when she moved on to that, that's another thing that I thought was a good, successful thing that they did. This was the first podcast of this set of podcasts where Allison gave a little bit of insight into the story team. This had been done in the past. I believe Doug Beyer did it in his original, in the original set of podcasts, which feel free to go back and watch those. We reviewed those as well. Doug Beyer discussed the fact that the snippet that I remember is you go to James Wyatt for religious discussions. Allison, and there were other things that he mentioned as well that I'm not going to remember off the top of my head. It was like a couple months ago. But that was something that Doug mentioned. I was like, yes, that makes perfect sense. I remembered that from reading James Wyatt stories. Mm-hmm. Allison mentioned in this one that you go to Ken Troop if you want crazy, out there, like interplanar, like super stories. I don't remember the exact terminology that she used. She said it better than I did. But we've discussed that as well, and that's something that we've noticed without having to be told that, is that Ken has written many stories where, as we've noted in our show, it is typically female characters who will go on these kind of extraordinary journeys through space, time, super intellectual, and like breaking things down to a molecular level or blowing it up to a cosmic level. It's just so out there. And then Allison said she contrasts Ken Troop's style by the fact, as Amy just pointed out, that she likes to write about two people sitting in a cafe, for example, and having a very in-depth discussion and kind of having that back and forth with one another of, snarky comments and getting the story across that way. And those are very different storytelling methods, and yet
Extremely.
yes, I mean almost night and day, almost opposites, if you will, but they both do them very well, and that's something that is nice to hear from a member of the story team, to go in depth in that way. But to be honest, at least with the Ken Troop side of it, I didn't need it. I'm not upset that she said it, and I'm not saying she shouldn't have. Because we've been following along, we didn't need that because we had drawn that conclusion for ourselves. But because we've read enough Ken Troop stories and been able to connect the dots. But for those people that haven't, that's a nice realization and a nice snippet of information, because you're interviewing a member of the story team. So talk about how you write the stories. Talk about how you use each other's strengths and maybe even weaknesses. It's not that bad of a thing to say, you know what, I'm not very good at writing about romance. And so we leave that for someone else to write about because I'm just not very comfortable with that. That's fine. And not to say that, it was missing and it needed to be there, but I'm giving that as an example of, like, when things like that occur, I appreciate hearing about that. I appreciate getting that in-depth look into the process, if you will, of the Magic Story team and why they pick specific people to write specific stories.
And as Warthos players, those are the aspects of these podcasts that we're really listening for, because we're not interested in Commander pretty much at all.
We are not.
But I really like the fact that that information was in there, because I'm hoping that Commander players are listening to these podcasts, absorbing all of the Commander information that they came to hear.
Mm-hmm.
But then they're also hearing that, and it's giving them this little spark of interest to start getting into reading the stories.
I like
if
that.
they hadn't been before.
I like that. I hadn't thought of it that way, but no, that would be really sweet. And I agree, and I hope that is the case. I think that's it for this week. Like I said, I liked this one the best out of all of them, and that was a low bar, as I stated, but I think I enjoyed it. If you can't tell from the tone of our discussion this week compared to the last 3 weeks before it, this was much better. And it was a nice way to close it out.
Yes.
And or segue it, because next week, as Allison pointed out at the end of this one, stay tuned, because next week she, and I guess presumably Blake as well, I don't know that I knew that it was going to be in this same format, but the way she made it sound like it was, that she and Blake would be back to discuss Ixalan. First look at Ixalan. Now, they've done little things here and there, at least at the recording of this episode, in terms of, showing a preview image here or a concept there or whatever. We will see what we get next week, and if it will be rehashing of things that have come up on the way to it, or if it's truly going to be, this is your opportunity. If you listen to this podcast, you will get things that no one else has gotten before listening to this podcast. And I genuinely hope that that's what it is, because as Amy said, bringing more eyes to the story and the importance of it is always a good thing, because it means that the story team is going to want to keep getting better and keep growing and improving, because they have someone or a group of someones to do that for.
Well, I think it was great for Wizards to sort of be able to identify these group subsets that existed within the Magic community. But I think it's far greater now that they are trying to blend them, that they're trying to break down those sort of barriers of those categories of Magic players, and saying, okay, well, what other aspects of this game can we get you to love?
Right.
If you already love a piece of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's important for a company to do.
Agreed. And I mean, we've had that discussion a lot on here as well, is that it's not just, Wizards does these things for entertainment purposes and to build their world, but they're also a company. And so they need to be looking at how to make money, how to keep the player base they already have, but also expand into other markets and other player bases so that you don't just keep your current base and then as people fall off of not playing the game anymore or whatever, you're just losing your target market more and more and more.
So you're expanding your player base, but then you're also strengthening the community.
Mm-hmm.
Because not only are you just adding more people in, but the people who are already there enjoying certain aspects of it can now enjoy more aspects of it, which just brings them closer to other people with other interests within the Magic community.
Right. So for this one, guys, I think we're all set. But as we always say, please let us know in the comments down below what you thought. Did you agree with us? Do you disagree with us? Maybe you thought that this was still a bad one.
Yeah.
Let us know why in the comments down below. If you agree with us, let us know why in the comments down below. We really hope you enjoyed. Thank you guys so much for watching, as you always do. This has been another episode of JAR on Geek for All. Please feel free to click some of these videos that are popping up all over the screen, maybe covering my face. You can watch, we have on this channel, product openings every Monday. Wow. Monday.
I was like, yeah, I know.
These reviews every Thursday and bonus draft videos every Saturday. You can click our logo right over here to subscribe. You'll find out when all of our videos come out. It helps us out a lot. Thank you guys so much.
Yes, please watch.
Thank you for showing off your
#Vorthos Pride, guys.
As I said, this is Jar. I've been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.